roster, so those of you who've been with our club for a little while, you probably have one of these. But if you take a look at it from our centennial year in 2011, you'll see on page 13 that our club actually held our first meetings at the Grant Club. So we are kind of doing a homecoming of sorts. This year we celebrate 110 years as a Rotary Club. So it feels right that we are meeting at a place that shares a historical connection. The Grant Club itself is no longer a building in Des Moines, but our club does have a historical marker sign where the building once stood, which is now on the property of the Catholic Diocese. And you can see this sign in this classic photo. And we have past President Jamie and past President Dick Reasons. And we have past President Jamie right up here. So now, past President Jamie Boersma will give us a moment of inspiration, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and four-way test.
Thank you, Catherine, and welcome to the podium. So this morning, as I was thinking about our speaker and the mission of the Iowa Business Council, I let my mind wander just a little bit into my time in the business community and some of the personal habits, rules of life, whatever you want to call them, that make for business success. The one which kept coming up in my head, well, it came from my parents, especially my father. So, and if you say what you're going to do, if you say you're going to do something, then you better do it. And he continues to say that in my head, even many years ago. But if you're going to say you do something, then you better do it. So I've been reading a book by Mark Batterson. It's called Win the Day, and it's 7 habits to help you stress less and accomplish more. So he quotes Frederick Buechner, and here's the quote: "All the unkept promises, if they are ever to be kept, have to be kept today. And all of the unspoken words, if you do not speak them today, will never be spoken." So with that, I inspire you today to consider what words you need to speak and what actions you need to take today, and then we'll go make it a better day. All right, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the four-way test.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Okay, you guys greet each other.
Well, he told me before that's where you guys were planning. Can't.
Good morning. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Better.
At this time, I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Judy McCoy Davis and to Janice Lane Schroeder. I don't think either one of them are here with us today. They're probably celebrating some other way, but if you see them around, wish them a happy birthday. And at this point, I would like to ask Paul Purpose to introduce our program for today. Paul?
Well, good seeing all the friends here today, and everybody else as well.
Better left than said.
Oh, there we go. Just modeling away. It's my pleasure to introduce Joe Murphy as our speaker today. Joe is the Executive Director of the Iowa Business Council. In this role, He leads an organization comprised of CEOs and top executives from the 22 largest employers in Iowa. The Iowa Business Council serves as a catalyst to elevate Iowa long-term economic vitality through global thought leadership, research, and advocacy. Prior to his role at the Iowa Business Council, Joe served as the Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy at the Greater Des Moines Partnership. While at the partnership, Joe helped organize efforts that resulted in significant legislative achievement in the areas of tax reform, workforce development, and infrastructure investment. Joe earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Northern Iowa and his master's degree in public administration from Drake University. Please help me welcome Joe today.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to be here today. Really appreciate the chance to talk about the Iowa Business Council, some of the things that we're working on. But before we get started, let me just convey my sense of thanks and appreciation for everything that you guys do here in this club and all the Rotary clubs of Des Moines. We were talking at our table beforehand that it's not by accident that Des Moines is thriving over the last 25 or 30 years, and it's largely thanks to people like you and community leaders like yourselves and people that came before you. So, as a proud resident of Des Moines, thanks in advance for everything that you're going to continue to do, and thanks for everything that you've done for our community. It's much appreciated, and we're in a better place because of all of you, so thank you. So today I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about what the Iowa Business Council is, dive into our signature research project, which is the Iowa Competitive Dashboard, talk a little bit about our recommendations, and then get into Iowa's economic outlook and future. And spoiler alert, we think the future is very bright here in Iowa. So a little bit about the Business Council. As Paul mentioned, we do represent the largest companies in the state of Iowa, 22 of the larger companies in our state. We were established in 1985, and I think that that's a really important founding date, obviously, because it's when we were established. But if you think back to 1985, it was in the midst of the farm crisis in Iowa. And as we go through that economic crisis, and fast forward to 2020, with the pandemic, we've been very, very careful to lean back into that founding mission of the Iowa Business Council, which is to uplift all Iowans and to be a catalyst for economic vitality throughout the entire state. It was those executive founders back in 1985 to not necessarily worry about companies' bottom lines in the state of Iowa, but how could they collectively bring together their intellectual and monetary capital to make Iowa a better place for all Iowans, and that's still at the heart of what we do. We're a nonpartisan organization, nonprofit organization. That's not to say we don't get involved in politics in the sense of advocacy. That's just part of the process. And as Paul mentioned, our three primary functions is research, which we'll talk about in a little bit, global thought leadership, and advocacy. So all in all, our members, our 22 largest members in Iowa, represent about 172,000 Iowans. We have $10 billion almost in payroll, combined payroll. We have $2 billion in research development, and we have almost $2 billion worth of capital investment. And so that's all to say, big business in Iowa, which sometimes people like to criticize big business and what all that entails, but big business in Iowa is a catalyst for this state's economic well-being and opportunities for all people. Not only are we an economic engine, but we also have very close ties to Iowa's small and medium-sized companies as well. They're our customers, our clients, and our partners. So it's a very important ecosystem that we bring forward each and every year. So I want to spend some time talking about our Iowa Competitive Dashboard. This is our signature research item that we publish in February of every year. Much of this data is from the U.S. Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other governmental agencies. This data was collected at the end of 2020, and obviously we're halfway through 2021, so some of the information that we'll see today is a little bit dated on the numbers, but the overall themes and metrics and where we stand is completely unchanged. But because we use census data, we're obviously getting new data basically every single day. This information is quite dynamic. The other thing I want to highlight for you is that this data is an apples to apples comparison. We take data in and compare Iowa out to the rest of the country, to all 49 other states. This provides us an opportunity to present independent analysis to lawmakers at the federal and state level, policymakers at the local level, and business leaders all throughout the state. And the whole goal for that is to give an independent assessment of where we stand, where we could be growing, and where we should be more prone for improvement, but then also where are those areas of strength that we should continue to invest in and prop up. It's not necessarily a marketing document. You can see some of the areas aren't as good as where we'd like them to be, but certainly we use this in some marketing capacities moving forward. So let's start with economic growth in the state of Iowa. You can see we're clearly in the yellow, which is in a very competitive way. One of the things that I like to point out in this statistic in this area is the fact that our gross state product for a state the size of Iowa, 3 million people, is very high. You'll see, I hope you can see on the screen there, we rank 30th out of 50 states for our gross state product. But our gross state product is $195 billion. That's enormous for a state the size of Iowa. And when you compare ourselves, Iowa, to state juggernauts like California or Texas or Virginia, whose GDP or GSP is greater than some countries in Europe, you get a sense on how you should look at this data in context. The other thing that I think is important with respect to our gross state product is the fact that it's increasing. We're increasing year over year over the last few years. And that's important because we've gone through some difficult times, whether it was through auditing our weather patterns, ag markets being volatile, and frankly some trade wars that we were engaging in at the international level. So very, very concerning at one level, but I think it really speaks to the resiliency in Iowa's economy moving forward, that we see that year over year increase. The other thing I'd like to point out on this is our manufacturing percentage of our gross state product. We're a perennial top 10 state with respect to the percentage of our economy dedicated to manufacturing. That's a really good statistic, I think, because obviously we have many, many inroads with a lot of other forms of economic output, whether that's agriculture, obviously, but biosciences, financial services, health services, etc. That really gives us a sense of diversity within our economy and has allowed us to weather economic storms much more efficiently and much more proudly, I think, than most other states in the country, particularly in the Midwest. Most people outside of Iowa think that our top industry is agriculture. Certainly that's the foundation, but manufacturing continues to win the day on that. I want to speak just a little bit about education and workforce. So I'm going to hit workforce a little bit later and talk about the workforce shortage that we're seeing. But from an education standpoint, this is one of the beacons that Iowa has always been for our country. In fact, it's one of the things that we're highlighting right now in our marketing campaign outside of Iowa to recruit new people into our state, talking about how great our public education system is in our state, all throughout Iowa. That being said, we have decreased a little bit in our standing year over year in both math and reading proficiency. That's obviously an area of concern. We don't want to be going that way. But all in all, we still are well within the top half of states and from a competitive standpoint. The one thing that concerns us, obviously, in the pandemic year, since this data is based on 2020 information, what's going to happen once we get data back from this past immediate school year, particularly in the Des Moines area with so many students out of the classroom for such a long period of time. One of the areas of focus that you'll see the Iowa Business Council engaging in, and we would love to partner with any of you moving forward, is work-based learning opportunities. That's a new statistic we're tracking. Currently, 121 high schools out of 453 or so high schools in Iowa offer this opportunity. And what this means is our businesses, or any business in the state, partner with a local K-12 school district or high school or middle school and provide that real world experience for a student so that they can better determine what their career path might be. It might not be a 4-year degree, or it might not be an apprenticeship program. It might be a certificate program or something else. But giving them the opportunity to explore those career choices early in their academic career, or at the end of their academic career, really, so that they can make a better decision for themselves and their families and their future once they graduate high school. We know that that's a significant opportunity for them and families, but it's also a significant opportunity for Iowa business as well to recruit and retain those individuals, stack that talent pipeline, and keep more people in Iowa moving ahead. So we obviously want to see that number increase. We were very excited that the governor recommended in her Economic Recovery Advisory Board last summer that all high school students should have the opportunity for work-based learning events in their high schools by the year 2024, and that's something that we're very excited about and will continue to work on. So let's talk about governance in the state. And when I talk about governance, I'm really talking about how our state is managed from a business competitive standpoint. You'll see that we're sort of creeping almost into the red here from an underperforming perspective, and the biggest reason for that would be our tax structure. Now, you can't invite the business guy to a Rotary meeting and not expect to talk about taxes and tax policy at some point. So thanks for entertaining me on this, but it's true. You can see here in our top two graphs here, Iowa ranks 46th out of 50 states in corporate tax climate and 40th out of 50 states in individual tax climate. Now, we're not one of those groups that says these tax rates should be zero. We're not like that. We understand that there's a role to play and that individuals have to be taxed at an appropriate measure. But what we are saying, particularly in the corporate side, is that we need to level the playing field, provide more transparency, we need to provide more stability, and we need to provide more competition. Our tax rate itself is 9.8%. That's lower from 12% a year ago, which is a trend in the right direction, obviously. But we went from, just on the rates, worst in the nation to a tied for 47th worst in the nation, with Pennsylvania and New Jersey ahead of us. So we know we have to work on that a little bit. We know that that's something that we need to increase our competition. But the point on this is, again, how complex our system is. We have a lot of tax credits in our system, and probably you as business owners and others get frustrated with the process in which you have to go about that. So let's cut the rates to something reasonable in the middle single digits. Let's update our tax credit plan, which is basically an apology system for how high our rates are, and move forward in a way that will incentivize economic growth, and then also incentivize companies to move into Iowa. You know, we don't know all the deals that we lose out on because they look at the top line rate, see that we're 9.8%, and then decide to go to South Dakota or Nebraska or Missouri or somewhere else. We don't even know that data, but we know anecdotally that it happens because they don't read the fine print. And that's what we're talking about. We want to make sure it works for the system while promoting economic growth and opportunity for all Iowans. Getting into healthcare and wellness, we're obviously not a healthcare organization, but that's a critical piece for overall economic well-being and welfare. And we would like to say that we've got some challenges here as well, particularly with respect to access to primary care physicians. We're quite low in this. However, the silver lining in the pandemic, I think, could help us really move forward in the way that we didn't think before, and that's through telehealth. We have significant investments in broadband internet capabilities coming through from the state, more money hopefully in the next few days or weeks from the federal government. We're all relatively familiar with Zoom, as I wave to our friends on Zoom here this afternoon. But that's the way that that our healthcare delivery system is being provided, particularly to the rural parts of Iowa too. So maybe there's a way that we can augment our access to primary care physicians in that way as well. A good opportunity for the state, something that we know we have to get better at if we want to continue to thrive and be healthy. Demographics and diversity is something that obviously is in the news quite a bit, and something that we're very concerned with as well from the Iowa Business Council's perspective. And we're concerned about it obviously from the diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint with respect to being open, being inclusive, and being willing to have those courageous conversations among our businesses to make sure that we're being welcoming and inclusive of everybody within our companies and within our state. But we also have a population challenge in this state as well, separate from the overall DEI aspects. We're at risk of becoming stagnant with our population. And in fact, I would argue that we have become stagnant. We projected at the beginning of the year that we would actually see a slight decrease in population. Now, thankfully, once the raw census numbers came out, that estimate, again from the Census Bureau, turned out not to be the case, but it did only show a 4% growth over a 10-year time period in Iowa. Now, 4% growth might seem like a lot, but that's only 14,000 people per year for 10 years. We're going the wrong direction on population. 1/3 of our counties reached their max population by the year 1900. More than 2/3 of our counties in Iowa reached their max population by the year 1950. We got to turn this around if we want to see a thriving workforce and a thriving economy in Iowa, and that's something that we're 100% focused on right now at the Iowa Business Council. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but immigration reform is definitely a key to that problem. As we talk about recommendations specifically for DEI, we really view the commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion as a fundamental element of corporate success and responsibility. We want to lead in this area, show examples of how our member companies are advancing this cause and making it really important for all of our workforce. It can't just be a top-down driven type of thing. So you'll see our companies, our members, really engaging in this space. They already have, but this is not something that's going away anytime soon. Our companies are committed to this process moving forward, and it's something that we're excited about as well in the months and years to come. So from a recommendation standpoint, I hit sort of the highlights on that a little bit already. Corporate tax reform, of course, is the main thing that we're looking at. When you think about recent initiatives that we had recommended to the legislature earlier this year, workforce housing and affordable housing was at the top of that list, along with child care incentives and initiatives. Those two things were largely accomplished this past session. There's still room for improvement, though. These issues don't go away. People continue to have babies, which is a very important thing for our economic standpoint. And so that child care issue will continue to be something that we're concerned about from a workforce perspective. And housing, of course, is something that's very important, not only to urban areas, but rural areas too. With all of the money coming in from the federal government and other opportunities, housing development projects throughout rural Iowa could really be that economic catalyst or process to spur economic development all throughout our state. From a timely standpoint, we've been heavily engaged in the bipartisan infrastructure framework discussion that's muddling its way through Congress right now, currently called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We came out in support of that framework in early June, once the overall framework was struck, and ever since then, we've been working with our federal delegation on getting that through the finish line. The Senate's obviously lining up amendment votes right now in Washington. We hope in the next few days that bill will come up for final passage. So most of our firepower is continuing to be engaged on the Senate, Senator Ernst, Senator Grassley, and then obviously when that moves to the House, we'll concentrate there. But the good news for Iowa in the bipartisan compromise package, and this was just announced yesterday, $3.4 billion Iowa will be eligible for its highway system, federal highway system, $432 million for bridge repair and replacement, $51 million for electric vehicle charging stations all throughout the state, and then a minimum of $100 million for broadband connectivity infrastructure. And that's on top of the $100 million that the Iowa legislature appropriated this immediate past legislative session. So a very good deal, a very important thing for us to invest in, and something that we're very excited to support. And if you're looking for an opportunity to engage in this process, Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley, I'm sure, would be more than happy to take an email or a call from you to get them on board as well. We're optimistic that they'll support it, but I think every piece of outreach is important to do. So let's talk about where we're going in the future here, not only over the next 6 months, but where we're headed over the next year as well from our outlook standpoint. So the Iowa Business Council each quarter puts out an economic survey of our top CEOs and executives, and that measures their level of optimism in Iowa's economy over the course of the next 6 months. Our survey score, our index score, in the second quarter, our score was 67.08. That's not a percentage, that's just a straight index metric. And for context standpoint, anything above 50 represents positive outlook. So that is great news. This is our highest level that we've been since 2018. This represents the fourth straight positive outlook that we've projected among our membership in a row. And that's come a long way from where we were at the first quarter and the second quarter of 2020, as you can imagine. There's obviously some very strong concerns around the workforce shortage issue. We're in the worst, most acute workforce shortage that we've ever seen in our state right now, and I'm sure you're all seeing that in your places of employment. And we're also still concerned, particularly from a manufacturing standpoint, on supply chain issues and pinch points within that global supply chain. So that needs to still be worked out. But all in all, I don't want to give the wrong impression. We're very optimistic, right? It's not to say that we're not out of the weeds on the pandemic. Obviously, there's a new variant, that's ravaging certain select populations of our communities. And we're very strong advocates of the Iowa Business Council to be vaccinated. So if you've not been vaccinated yet, there's a Hy-Vee, which is a great Iowa Business Council member just down the street. You can pop in there on your way home today and get a vaccine. strongly encourage that. But our future is bright. We've always weathered economic crises much better than the rest of the country, and this time will be no different, and I honestly believe that. From a historical standpoint, this is all of our data dating back to 2008, and you can see two big troughs there. Obviously, the trough on the left is the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and then obviously the pandemic economic crisis over the last 18 months. Again, we're back to where we were from an optimism standpoint, certainly not back to where we were potentially from an output standpoint, and obviously there's some micro concerns in there, particularly with hospitality, service industries, and others. But again, we're very optimistic moving forward. And that's not just our data, that's state of Iowa data as well. The fiscal year that ended June 30th of this year, 2021, we saw almost a 20% increase in receipts, revenue receipts coming into the state. That's a huge number. $1.4 billion above what we took in the year prior. And all that means is we have a lot of money in this state right now. Just from a state standpoint, we're gonna have a huge economic surplus once the state officially closes its books on September 30th. And that doesn't even count for the American Rescue Plan dollars or the ARP dollars that have been flowing into Iowa over the last 18 months to the tune of $8 billion. And then there's other money that's filtering in on top of that as well when you think about child care assistance and others. So there's a lot of money flowing in our economy right now. There's never been more liquidity. That obviously has an inflationary pressure on everything that we're concerned with within the Iowa Business Council. But our main concern right now is Iowa's employment and Iowa's workforce development. Some troubling statistics. Obviously, I said this is the worst workforce shortage that we've experienced in the last 20 years or so. And just to put this into perspective, in May of 2021, this is the latest data that we could get, although I think data might be released tomorrow, so I should have come in next week. In May 2021, 66.4% of Iowans were employed or searching for employment. Those were the participants of our population that were in the labor force. Compare that 1 month before the pandemic, in February of 2020, almost 70% of Iowans were employed or searching for employment, literally weeks before the pandemic. And that's something that we've touted as a long time standard in this state, right? Our very high labor participation rate, and that's a good thing. That also leads to some workforce challenges, but now we're seeing that wane off a little bit. That actually equates to about 74,000 individuals no longer participating in the Iowa workforce labor pool than previously was in 18 months ago. And we're trying to figure out what that is. We're talking at our table, is it the great resignation? Are people just deciding not to work where they worked for however many years because they're not passionate about it and they've had an enlightenment based on the pandemic, understandably so, that they're going to go pursue a passion project somewhere, and that's totally fine, but how do we adjust for that? How do we shuffle that? Is it a 58, 59, 60-year-old, someone who was maybe 4 or 5 years away from retirement that said, you know what, I've had enough. This pandemic thing, my portfolio has never been better. I'm going to push my chips in and retire early. We're seeing that time and time again. The one thing that's very concerning for us, though, is the impact on working women and mothers in our economy. How is this impacting them? And we know from data, not only in Iowa, but throughout the country as well, that this is impacting them at a much more accelerated rate than it's impacting men in the workforce. Women are more likely to leave their job and career to take care of their child, regardless of pandemic situation. But when the pandemic hit and people were pulling their kids out of pulling their children out of schools, it oftentimes fell to the mother to go and educate those kids. That's a choice that they have to make, and understandably so, but how do we get them back into the workforce? How can we get them back into leadership positions? We're also seeing a very unique thing in Iowa too, where it's twofolded in a sense. It's young women in the workforce, but it's also people in that midstream. It's that maybe 39 to 49-year-old workforce as well that have left, which is really interesting for us, and that's really unique overall to Iowa, which is something that's concerning that we got to dig down into a little bit more. So that's a concerning aspect from an Iowa Business Council perspective, is our workforce. Coming back to work-based learning, we know we have to prime that pump early, but that's a long-term process. That's sort of like planting trees, right? We need to get in early, but we need to do that work now. So what can we do with respect to getting into a more promising workforce. And we think at the Business Council that a lot of that is related to the immigration debate in this country. We would really like to see, knock on wood, the bipartisan infrastructure agreement using the momentum that Congress can actually tackle tough and vexing policy questions right now and use that momentum and put their efforts into immigration reform. It's never been more important, right? This has been a 25-year issue. 4 US presidents haven't been able to figure this out. And now we're on a 5th. So we have to update our H-1B visa process, our H-2As, our H-2Bs. We have to make it more, we have to be more accepting of individuals coming into this country. By and large, we also have to be welcoming of international students. International students come from all over the world, obviously, to Iowa and to everywhere else in this country to gain our education. And we're help paying for that. They pay full freight tuition, but our tax dollars go in to help educate them as well. So let's get some return on investment. They want to stay here. We know they want to stay here. Let's make it easier for them. And we can talk about all the studies that show all the Fortune 500 companies and all the tech companies that have been started by immigrants and how we need to really recognize that and support that entrepreneurial spirit, because our very future quite literally depends on that. So you'll see the Iowa Business Council in the coming weeks and months really pivot strongly into the federal immigration debate. The border issue is completely separate, in our opinion, on this, and we really need to just sound the alarm on this. It goes back to our population issues, goes back to our workforce issues. This is almost existential, and all of you have a role to play in this. Contacting your federal delegation, talking about the need for this process to get underway is hugely important and would be beneficial not only for your own companies, but for the overall health of Iowa's economy as well. As we wrap up 2021, as we look ahead to 2022, we're putting the final touches on our state legislative agenda. We have a special session coming up probably sometime in September to figure out the Iowa congressional maps, and we can talk about that in Q&A if anybody has questions. Short answer is I have no idea what the map's going to look like. Des Moines is going to grow, Cedar Rapids is going to grow, other places will not. But I have some ideas on that. But I think by and large, our agenda is relatively set. We don't like to boil the ocean at the Iowa Business Council. We like to take on generational policy issues. What can we be done? What can we get done right now? And how can we set the perspective for long-term future success for all Iowans, not just a few companies, for all Iowans, and that's what we'll continue to do. So with that, thank you so much for your time and attention today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks again for everything that you've done and will continue to do for our community. And I don't know if there's time, but we welcome any sorts of questions. That's my contact information, cell phone. Feel free to text me or call me all the time. But you have to give a book recommendation if you do, and you also have to support the UNI Panthers. All right. Yes, sir.
Can you give us any specifics on the child care issue?
Yeah.
What the priorities are legislatively in the Iowa Business Council?
Yeah, so this last year, we were very strong supporters of the child care cliff effect, solving that issue. So for those of you who don't know, over the last 4 or 5 years, there were individuals in our communities all throughout the state that were declining wage increases, mostly through hourly, because if they took that wage increase, they would make enough money to basically fall off the cliff of their statewide child care assistance program. So it was more lucrative for them to stay on that program than it was to be rewarded for their strong work ethic and integrity. So that's just people question, is the system rigged against certain people? And that's the type of stuff that people point to and look at. And so we were able to raise the threshold, working with a broad coalition of partners, increase that threshold to increase the percentage of poverty. So you won't have that significant drop off from a cliff from a wage standpoint, but then we provide a staggered off-ramp as well. So that was one area. And then we were also able to increase, again, working with a broad coalition, certain tax credits going from $45,000, increase that eligibility up to $90,000 for child care development and tax credits as well for individuals. So those are 2 areas. We know that there needs to be more work to be done on the cliff effect issue as well. It's going to get wonky and a little bit into the weeds, but There's an entry point issue now, so we've effectively created a donut hole. So right now we changed the law so that you can maintain your benefits up to 225% of the federal poverty line. What did not get changed was the entry point. So if you come into the system at a level higher than 150%, even though if you started earlier, you would get the benefit all the way through. If you come in at too high a level, you don't get anything, and that's obviously not what we intended, what anybody intended, but as the legislative process worked, you just run out of time and vehicles to get that fixed. So that'd be the one thing that we want to change right away this session coming up. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What are the objections to tax reform in Iowa? It seems like such a no-brainer to keep us competitive, but I know that's been on the Business Council's agenda for a while, and why isn't it changing?
It's such a good question. I think there is it's so hard to do, right? It's extremely difficult from a policy perspective just to make everything work. And not only do you have to, we kind of got ourselves into trouble, I think, with Iowa, right? Because we have this tax credit system that's incredibly onerous, but at the same time we have rates that are really high. And you have to adjust those things simultaneously. Because if we get rid of the tax credits, we would say, well, you have to do the rates at the same time because, while I trust you that you will take care of this issue, if you don't do it at the same time, businesses won't be able to plan. So it's a much more complicated legislative process than the individual income tax side. And then frankly, obviously, it's a political issue too, right? I mean, it's not politically expedient to talk about corporate tax reductions, right now. It's probably the worst climate for that, frankly. There's this element of populism that's crept into both parties right now. And that's where I think we can really provide that value to policymakers. Again, we're nonpartisan. We want to call balls and strikes where we see them and provide that independent analysis and credibility to say this is what's not working, here's what can work, and here's how we can move forward. But we gotta bite that off one bite at a time. Yes, sir.
Would your proposals on tax reform result in a net drop in revenue to the state? I mean, are you trying to just reshuffle things, get away from credits, reduce the rate so that it comes out revenue neutral or not?
We don't have a position on whether it needs to be revenue neutral or not. If it's revenue neutral, it's fine. Obviously, the devil's in the details. We would hate to see a situation where there would be such a drop in revenue where we end up like we're Kansas, right? I mean, that's the concern. So we need to be thoughtful and we need to be pragmatic on how we're restructuring our tax policy. We don't have a specific, policy doctrine that it must be neutral or it must be a decrease. It just needs to make sense. And so much of that, I know it's a little bit of a cop-out, but so much of that is in the details. How can we net out to get somewhat around neutral, but then also how do we make it more simplified so you don't need a CPA and 4 attorneys to work through what your net effective rate is going to be.
So your members aren't necessarily looking to reduce their tax rates, although I'm sure they wouldn't mind that. It's the simplification.
Yeah.
The goal.
Right, but I don't. You can't simplify without reducing the rates, because if you want to simplify the tax code, you have to get rid of tax credits, certain tax credits, and if you get rid of those, then that's an effective tax increase on companies. So you have to simultaneously reduce rates at the same time. So we would say our top line rates right now are 9.8% in Iowa. We would say somewhere between 4, 5, 6% would be more in line from a competitive standpoint. Thank you. Yes, sir. One more question I'm being told, but I'll hang out.
Great report, Joe. You mentioned the labor shortage, and it's particularly acute in some industries, hospitality industry. What is the real data as to, there wasn't a shortage before COVID, there is a shortage now. What's the insight you can give us?
On the hospitality side?
Yes.
I think, anecdotally, I know that, this is in reports too, I think, restaurants and hospitality were hit the worst in this pandemic, and they were laid off, they were unemployed, and so either they were on unemployment benefits hoping that their restaurants would open up at some time. But frankly, a lot of those industry workers, particularly in the hospitality side, are going to work at other places, whether it's retail. Amazon is a huge competitor for the service industry, the Amazon trucks. They're paying a very high wage. And if you were a waiter somewhere, or a bartender, or working at a hotel, maybe driving around with a map and dropping off packages is a little bit easier than, you know, working a Saturday night somewhere else, dealing with customers and food orders and working late into the night. So that's really where we're seeing it. That's where we think they've gone retail and frankly some of the e-commerce as well. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe, for spending time with our club today and for sharing such a timely, informative presentation with all of us. We are donating the book, Who Was Walt Disney, to the Downtown School Library in your honor. And I know Joe has inscribed some words to the kids, so thank you. Thank you all for being with us today. Upcoming meetings, August 12th, Mayor, Honorary Member Frank County, father of Katy County, I have to add that too. August 19th, our very own John Stark. Where is he? I know I saw him. There he is, our very own John Stark. Downsize, minimize, or is it right size? Whatever you call it, learn from someone who did it, and all your dreams will come true. Hey, that sounds like a spicy presentation. All right, thank you for being with us today and for being part of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. We are adjourned.